The snowstorm hit the mountain pass with a fury that turned the world white in seconds. And inside the lurching stagecoach, Natalie Jameson gripped the leather seat as her heart hammered against her ribs. She had left Philadelphia 3 weeks ago, traveling west to Fort Davis, Texas, where her uncle had promised her work at his trading post. The journey had been long and exhausting, crossing from the green hills of Pennsylvania through the endless plains and finally into the rugged mountains of West Texas. Now, in December of 1877, the winter weather had caught them completely unprepared. The driver shouted something she could not hear over the roaring wind. The coach tilted dangerously to one side, throwing Natalie against the wooden frame. Her traveling companion, an elderly woman named Mrs. Patterson who had boarded in El Paso, let out a sharp cry of alarm. "Hold on." Natalie reached across to steady the older woman, her gloved fingers finding Mrs. Patterson's trembling hand. The stage lurched again, this time coming to a grinding halt that sent both women sprawling forward. The luggage secured to the roof above them shifted with an ominous creak. For several heartbeats, there was only the howling wind and the nervous whinnying of the horses. The driver's face appeared at the window, red and wind burned beneath his hat. "We are stuck, ladies. Snow came down too fast. The horses cannot pull us through these drifts." Natalie pushed herself upright, brushing dark auburn hair from her face. "How far are we from Fort Davis?" "Maybe 15, 16 miles. But in this weather," he shook his head grimly, "might as well be 100. We are not going anywhere until this storm passes. Mrs. Patterson's voice quavered. "How long will that be?" "Could be hours. Could be days." The driver pulled his collar tighter against the biting cold. "We have got some supplies in the boot. I will get them secured. You ladies stay inside and keep warm as best you can." The window closed, leaving Natalie and Mrs. Patterson alone in the growing darkness. Natalie reached for the wool blanket rolled at her feet, shaking it out and draping it over both their laps. Through the frosted glass, she could see nothing but white. "I have been through worse, Mrs. Patterson said, though her voice lacked conviction. "In '63, when the war was on, I was trapped in a farmhouse for a week with nothing but cornmeal and dried beans." Natalie managed a small smile. "Then you will have to teach me how to stay patient." The hours crawled by. The driver and the shotgun guard, a younger man named Billy, made attempts to dig out the wheels, but the snow kept falling, burying their efforts as quickly as they made them. By nightfall of the first day, it became clear they were truly trapped. The temperature inside the coach dropped steadily, and Natalie found herself grateful for every layer of clothing she wore. They rationed the food carefully. Hardtack, dried beef, a small tin of peaches that they savored in tiny spoonfuls. The driver told them that the nearest way station was 8 miles back, but traveling in the storm would be suicide. Their only hope was that someone would realize the stage had not arrived and send help. The second day brought no relief. If anything, the storm intensified. Wind rocked the stage on its wheels, and snow piled so high against the doors that they could barely force them open. The driver looked increasingly worried, his confident demeanor cracking. "How much food do we have left?" Natalie asked him quietly when Mrs. Patterson dozed off on the second afternoon. "Enough for maybe 2 more days if we are careful." He rubbed his weather-beaten face. "But the cold is the real problem. We are burning through our firewood trying to keep from freezing." They had managed to build small fires in a sheltered spot beside the coach, but the wind kept extinguishing them, and gathering wood from the sparse trees around the pass was becoming increasingly dangerous as the drifts deepened. On the morning of the third day, Natalie woke to silence. The wind had finally stopped. She pushed aside the blankets and pressed her face to the window, her breath fogging the glass. The world outside was buried under what looked like 10 feet of fresh snow, the landscape transformed into an alien terrain of white peaks and valleys. "We are in trouble," the driver said flatly when they gathered outside. The cold was so intense it burned Natalie's lungs with each breath. "Even if I could get the horses moving, there is no trail anymore. Everything is covered." Billy stamped his feet, trying to keep circulation going. "Maybe we should try to walk out, head back to the way station. In snow this deep, we would not make it a mile." The driver shook his head. "No, we stay put and hope someone comes looking." Natalie looked down the pass in the direction they had been heading. Somewhere beyond those mountains was Fort Davis, her uncle, and the new life she had been building in her mind for weeks. The thought that she might die here, so close to her destination, felt bitterly unfair. "Someone will come," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "They will realize the stage is overdue." 12 miles away, in a cabin tucked into a sheltered valley, Vincent Quinn was checking his trapline when he noticed the unusual stillness. He had lived in these mountains for 5 years, ever since leaving the army at Fort Concho, and he had learned to read the signs the wilderness provided. The storm that had raged for 3 days was the worst he had seen in 2 winters, and he knew what that meant for anyone caught out in it. Vincent was a large man, standing well over 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and arms thick with muscle from years of hard labor. His dark hair fell past his collar, and a full beard covered the lower half of his face. He wore buckskin pants and a heavy coat lined with fur, clothes he had made himself from animals he had trapped and hunted. At 32 years old, he preferred the solitude of the mountains to the company of people, having seen enough of what men could do to each other during his years as a cavalry scout. But as he stood in the clearing near his cabin, something nagged at him. The stage route to Fort Davis ran through the pass about 12 miles north of his land. If the stage had been traveling when the storm hit, there was a good chance it was in serious trouble. Vincent returned to his cabin and stared at the supplies on his shelves. It was not his problem. The stage company had their own people to handle rescues. He had no obligation to risk his neck for strangers, but the nagging feeling would not leave him. He thought of the people who might be trapped out there, travelers, maybe families. The image of frozen bodies buried in snow drifts rose unbidden in his mind, and he cursed under his breath. "Damn fool thing to do," he muttered to himself as he began gathering supplies. He packed dried meat, coffee, matches, extra blankets, and rope. His snowshoes hung on the wall, and he took them down along with his rifle. If he was going to do this, he would do it right. The journey north was brutal. Even with snowshoes, Vincent sank knee-deep in places, and the drifts were so high in others that he had to detour around them entirely. He navigated by landmarks he knew well, but the storm had transformed the landscape into something almost unrecognizable. Trees he had passed 100 times were now barely visible humps in the snow. He traveled steadily, stopping only briefly to rest and eat. The sun was weak through the clouds, providing little warmth but enough light to see by. Vincent kept his eyes on the terrain, watching for any sign of the stage route. The going was slow and exhausting, each step requiring effort that left his leg muscles burning. By late afternoon, he had covered perhaps 8 miles. The light was starting to fade, and Vincent knew he would have to make camp soon. He found a spot beneath an overhang of rock that provided some shelter from the wind and built a small fire. As he sat eating jerky and drinking coffee heated in a tin cup, he wondered again why he was doing this. The truth, he admitted to himself, was that he had been alone too long. The isolation he had once craved now felt like a weight he carried. Maybe saving someone, if there was anyone to save, would remind him that there was still some purpose to his existence beyond mere survival. He slept fitfully, waking several times to feed the fire. At first light, he was moving again, pushing north through the endless white. The mountains rose around him, their peaks sharp against the pale sky. Hawks circled overhead, looking for prey desperate enough to venture out into the open. After another 4 hours of hard travel, Vincent spotted something that made him quicken his pace. Dark shapes against the snow, too regular to be natural. As he drew closer, his heart began to pound. It was the stagecoach, half buried in a drift, looking small and fragile against the vast wilderness. He approached cautiously, calling out, "Hello, anyone there?" For a moment there was no response, and Vincent felt a cold fear that he was too late. Then the coach door burst open and a young woman stumbled out into the snow, her face pale but her eyes fierce with hope. "Thank God," she gasped. "Thank God you came." Vincent found himself staring. The woman was beautiful, even half frozen and exhausted. Her auburn hair tumbled around her shoulders, escaping from beneath a wool cap, and her eyes were the color of summer grass. She wore a traveling dress that was completely inadequate for the weather, though she had wrapped herself in blankets. "How many are you?" Vincent asked, forcing himself to focus on the practical matters. "4, myself, another passenger, and 2 with the stage company." She stepped forward, nearly falling in the deep snow. Vincent moved quickly, catching her arm to steady her. "Easy now, save your strength." He looked past her to the coach. "Everyone's still alive." "Yes, but Mrs. Patterson is very weak, and we are nearly out of food and firewood." The woman looked up at him, and Vincent felt something shift in his chest at the gratitude in her eyes. "You came all this way to find us." Seemed like the right thing to do. Vincent released her arm and moved toward the coach. "Let me see what we are dealing with." The next hour was spent assessing the situation. The elderly Mrs. Patterson was indeed in poor condition, shivering violently despite the blankets wrapped around her. The driver and Billy were better off, but showing signs of frostbite on their fingers and faces. Vincent broke out his supplies and got a proper fire going, using dry wood he had brought in his pack. "You cannot have come from Fort Davis," the driver said, warming his hands over the flames. "That is still 15 miles east. My cabin is 12 miles south," Vincent confirmed. "Saw the storm and figured someone might need help." The young woman who had first emerged from the coach sat beside the fire, holding a cup of hot coffee in both hands. "I am Natalie Jameson," she said. "You saved our lives, Mr. Quinn, Vincent Quinn." He met her eyes across the fire. "But we are not out of danger yet. This stage is not going anywhere, not with snow this deep. We need to get you all to shelter." "Can we make it to Fort Davis?" Billy asked. Vincent shook his head. "Not a chance, not with Mrs. Patterson in her condition. My cabin is closer and I know the route. We will rest here tonight, build up everyone's strength, then start out at first light." The driver looked uncertain. "That is a long trek for folks who are already worn down." "It is the only option unless you want to wait here until spring." Vincent's tone was matter of fact. "The stage company will send a rescue party eventually, but it could be weeks before they can get through. We do not have weeks." Natalie spoke up, her voice steady despite the exhaustion Vincent could see in her face. "Then we go to your cabin. If you are willing to guide us, Mr. Quinn, we will follow." Vincent nodded, respecting her decisiveness. "Get some rest tonight. Eat as much as you can. The walk tomorrow will take everything you have got." As night fell, they huddled around the fire. Vincent had brought enough food to give everyone a decent meal, and the hot coffee did wonders for morale. Mrs. Patterson rallied somewhat, managing to eat some dried meat and hardtack softened in hot water. Natalie found herself watching their rescuer, as he moved about the camp with quiet efficiency. Vincent Quinn was unlike any man she had encountered in Philadelphia. There was a raw power in the way he moved, a confidence born from years of surviving in this harsh land. His hands were large and calloused, but she had noticed how gentle he was when helping Mrs. Patterson. And when he had caught her arm earlier, preventing her fall, she had felt the strength in his grip, like being held by something solid and immovable. "How long have you lived out here?" she asked him when they found themselves alone at the edge of the firelight, both standing watch while the others slept. 5 years, give or take. Vincent's eyes scanned the darkness, always alert. Left the army and wanted to get away from people for a while. The army, cavalry. Scouted for patrols out of Fort Concho and Fort Stockton. He glanced at her. "What brings you to Texas? You do not sound like you are from around here." "Philadelphia," Natalie confirmed. "My uncle owns a trading post in Fort Davis. He offered me work after my father passed away last year." "I am sorry for your loss." "Thank you." Natalie pulled her blanket tighter. "My father wanted me to marry a banker back in Philadelphia, but after he died, I decided I wanted something different, something more than tea parties and calling cards." Vincent's mouth quirked slightly beneath his beard. "You picked a hard land to find yourself in. Maybe that is what I need." Natalie looked out at the darkness, at the vast sweep of stars beginning to emerge as the clouds finally broke apart. Something real and hard and honest. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, and Natalie found herself acutely aware of Vincent's presence beside her. He radiated warmth and a sense of safety that she desperately needed after 3 days of terror in the trapped stage. "You should get some sleep," Vincent said eventually. "Tomorrow will be difficult. What about you?" "I will keep watch for a few more hours, then wake Billy to take a turn." He met her eyes, and in the firelight she saw that his were a deep brown, almost black. "Do not worry about me, Miss Jameson. I have spent plenty of nights in the cold." Natalie nodded and returned to the fire, but sleep was a long time coming. She kept thinking about the mountain man who had walked 12 miles through deadly snow to rescue strangers, asking nothing in return. Dawn came cold and clear, the sky a brilliant blue that hurt to look at. Vincent roused everyone and made sure they ate a good breakfast. He fashioned makeshift snowshoes for Natalie and Mrs. Patterson from branches and rope, teaching them how to walk with the awkward contraptions. "Go slow and steady," he instructed. "Do not try to rush. Save your energy for the long haul." The journey began. Vincent led the way, breaking trail through the deep snow. The driver and Billy came next, supporting Mrs. Patterson between them. Natalie brought up the rear, determined not to slow the group down. The first few hours were manageable. The cold was intense but bearable, and the clear weather meant they could see where they were going. Vincent navigated with uncanny skill, choosing routes that avoided the deepest drifts and steepest slopes. Several times they had to stop and rest, and Vincent would check on each person, making sure no one was developing frostbite or showing signs of exhaustion beyond what they could handle. By midday, they had covered perhaps 4 miles. Mrs. Patterson was flagging badly, and Billy was not much better. The driver, a tough old veteran of many frontier routes, was holding up better but still breathing hard. Natalie felt like her legs were made of lead. Each step was an exercise in willpower, forcing one foot in front of the other through snow that seemed determined to drag her down. But every time she looked up and saw Vincent's broad back moving steadily ahead, she found the strength to keep going. They stopped for a brief meal in the shelter of some rocks. Vincent rationed out more dried meat and got a small fire going to melt snow for drinking water. "How much farther?" the driver asked, his earlier skepticism replaced by exhausted hope. "We have covered about 1/3 of the distance," Vincent said. "If we can manage another few hours, we will reach a spot where I have a small cache of supplies. We can spend the night there and finish the journey tomorrow." Mrs. Patterson looked up from where she sat huddled against a boulder. "I am slowing everyone down. Perhaps you should leave me and come back when you can." "No one is getting left behind," Vincent said firmly. "We all make it or we all stay together trying. Those are the only options." Natalie felt a rush of warmth toward him that had nothing to do with the fire. She caught his eye and mouthed a silent thank you. He gave a slight nod in return. They rested for half an hour, then pushed on. The afternoon stretched into evening, and Natalie's world narrowed to the simple act of putting one foot in front of the other. Her muscles screamed in protest. Her lungs burned from breathing the frigid air. But she refused to give up, refused to be the one who broke. Just when she thought she could not take another step, Vincent called a halt. "We are here." Natalie looked around and saw nothing but snow and trees. Then Vincent moved aside some branches to reveal a small cave entrance, carefully concealed. Inside, she could see supplies stacked neatly against the stone walls. "I keep several caches scattered through these mountains," Vincent explained as he helped everyone inside. "Never know when you might need emergency supplies." The cave was shallow but provided blessed shelter from the wind. Vincent built a fire near the entrance, positioning it so the smoke would vent out while the heat reflected back into the space. He broke out more blankets, more food, and even a bottle of whiskey that he rationed out in small doses. "For medicinal purposes," he said with the ghost of a smile. That night, warm and fed, with the worst seemingly behind them, the mood lifted considerably. The driver told stories of his years on the stage routes, and Billy shared tales of his childhood in San Antonio. Mrs. Patterson fell asleep almost immediately, snoring softly beneath a pile of blankets. Natalie found herself sitting beside Vincent as they watched the fire burn down to coals. The others had dozed off, leaving them alone together in the flickering darkness. "Thank you," she said softly. "I do not think I have properly expressed how grateful I am. We would have died in that pass if you had not come." Vincent shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Natalie said firmly. "They would not have. You walked 12 miles through snow that could have killed you to help people you had never met. That is not something just anyone would do." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Natalie felt her breath catch. There was something in his eyes, a vulnerability beneath the tough exterior. "I have spent the last 5 years trying to forget about the world," Vincent said quietly. "Trying to forget about people, and all the ways we hurt each other. But the truth is, being alone is not the same as being at peace. Maybe I came looking for you because I needed a reminder that there is still some good worth fighting for." Natalie's heart hammered in her chest. She reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away if he wanted, and placed her hand over his. His skin was warm and rough, his hand easily twice the size of hers. "You are a good man, Vincent Quinn," she said, "whether you want to admit it or not." They sat like that for a long moment, hands touching, the fire crackling between them and the world reduced to this small cave in the wilderness. Then Vincent squeezed her hand gently and released it. "Get some rest," he said, his voice slightly rough. "Tomorrow we finish this journey." Natalie lay down on the blankets Vincent had laid out for her, but sleep was elusive. Her mind kept returning to the feel of his hand in hers, to the look in his eyes when he had spoken about needing to remember the good in the world. Something was growing between them, something that both thrilled and terrified her. The final leg of the journey the next day was easier. The distance was shorter, and everyone had rested. Vincent led them down out of the high country into his valley, and when his cabin came into view, Natalie felt a profound sense of relief and accomplishment. The cabin was larger than she had expected, built solidly from logs with a stone chimney rising from one end. Vincent had chosen his location well, tucked into a spot protected from the worst winds with a clear stream running nearby. "It is not fancy," Vincent said as he opened the door, "but it is warm and dry." Inside, the cabin was a single large room with a sleeping loft above. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and Natalie could see a well-stocked kitchen area, a work table, shelves full of supplies and tools. Furs covered the floor and the simple bed in the corner. It was austere but comfortable, the home of a man who valued function over decoration. Vincent got the fire going and showed everyone where to settle in. Mrs. Patterson was given the bed, while the men would sleep in the loft. That left Natalie with a pile of furs and blankets near the fireplace, which she accepted gratefully. Over the next few days, as everyone recovered their strength, a comfortable routine developed. Vincent proved to be an excellent cook, preparing meals of venison, rabbit, and even trout he caught through holes in the ice of the nearby stream. Mrs. Patterson improved dramatically with rest and good food. The driver and Billy, both tough men used to frontier hardships, bounced back quickly. Natalie found herself falling into the rhythms of cabin life with surprising ease. She helped with cooking and cleaning, insisted on doing her share of the work despite Vincent's protests that she was a guest. She learned how to prepare wild game, how to make coffee that did not taste like mud, how to bank a fire so it would last through the night, and she learned about Vincent. Not from him directly, for he was not a man given to long conversations about himself, but from watching him. She saw his patience in the way he taught Billy to repair snowshoes, his kindness in the gentle way he checked on Mrs. Patterson each morning, his strength in the effortless way he split firewood or hauled water from the stream. She also saw his loneliness, though he tried to hide it. The way he sometimes stood at the window and stared out at the mountains with an expression of such profound solitude that it made her heart ache. One evening, about a week after their arrival, Natalie found Vincent outside splitting wood despite the late hour. The moon was full and bright, turning the snow blue-white. She wrapped a fur around her shoulders and went out to join him. "You do not have to do that now," she said. "We have plenty of wood stacked." Vincent brought the axe down, splitting a log cleanly in two. "Keeps me busy." Natalie leaned against the cabin wall, watching him work. Even in the cold, exertion had him shedding his coat. His shirt stretched across his broad shoulders and muscular back as he swung the axe. She had never seen a man built like him, all raw power and controlled strength. "What are you running from?" she asked quietly. The axe paused mid-swing. Vincent slowly lowered it and turned to face her. "What makes you think I am running from anything?" "Because no one lives this far from civilization unless they are trying to escape something." Natalie met his eyes steadily. "You do not have to tell me if you do not want to. But I want you to know that whatever it is, it does not change what you did for us. It does not change who I see when I look at you." Vincent was silent for a long moment. Then he set the axe aside and walked over to stand beside her, both of them looking out at the moonlit valley. "I was a scout during the Indian Wars," he said finally. "Spent 3 years tracking Comanche and Apache raiders. I was good at it. Too good." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was heavy with old pain. "I led a patrol to a mescalero camp in '69. We were supposed to be looking for stolen horses. But when we got there, the commander decided to attack. It was not a raiding camp. It was families. Women, children, old people." Natalie felt her chest tighten but said nothing, letting him continue. "I tried to stop it, tried to get the commander to stand down. He had me arrested for insubordination. By the time I convinced his superior that what was happening was a massacre, it was over. 23 people dead, most of them innocent. Vincent's hands clenched into fists. The commander got a reprimand. I got discharged for threatening to kill him if he ever gave me another order. "Oh, Vincent," Natalie breathed. "I came out here because I could not stand to look at another uniform, another fort, another reminder of what we did in the name of settling the frontier." He finally looked at her. "So yes, I am running from the memory of what I saw, what I failed to prevent." Natalie reached out and took his hand, not caring about propriety or what was proper. "You did everything you could. You stood up when others would not have. That takes more courage than running into any fight. Does it? Because from where I stand, it looks like I just failed and then ran away to hide in the mountains. You did not run away. You removed yourself from a situation where you had no power to change things." Natalie squeezed his hand. "But Vincent, you cannot live in isolation forever. That is not living. That is just existing. Maybe existing is all I deserve." "That is absolutely not true." Natalie stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "You are a good man who was put in an impossible situation. You tried to do the right thing, and it did not work out the way you hoped. But that does not make you responsible for what that commander did, and it does not mean you should spend the rest of your life punishing yourself." Vincent looked down at her, and in the moonlight she could see the war playing out across his face, the need to believe her battling against years of self-recrimination. "How can you be so sure?" he asked, his voice rough. "Because I have spent a week watching you. Watching the way you care for people, the way you give of yourself without expecting anything in return. That is not the behavior of a bad man, Vincent. That is the behavior of someone with more honor than he knows what to do with." They stood there in the cold, hands clasped, the space between them charged with something neither had quite acknowledged yet. Then Vincent slowly, carefully, raised his free hand to cup her face. His palm was rough against her cheek, but his touch was infinitely gentle. "Natalie," he said, just her name, but she heard everything he could not say in the way he spoke it. "Yes," she whispered, not even sure what she was agreeing to, only knowing that whatever was happening between them felt right and true and more real than anything she had experienced in her carefully ordered life back in Philadelphia. Vincent leaned down, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But Natalie rose on her toes to meet him halfway, and when their lips touched, it felt like coming home to a place she had never been. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, as if they were both afraid of breaking something fragile. Then Vincent's arm came around her waist, pulling her against the solid wall of his chest, and Natalie's hands found their way into his long hair. And the kiss deepened into something that made her forget about the cold, the danger they had survived, everything but the man holding her like she was something precious. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. "I do not know what I have to offer you," he said quietly. "I am just a man living in the wilderness." "You are so much more than that," Natalie countered. "And I do not need you to offer me anything except yourself. I came west looking for something real, Vincent. I think I found it." They stood wrapped in each other's arms until the cold finally drove them back inside. The others were already asleep, and Vincent and Natalie separated reluctantly, going to their respective sleeping areas. But Natalie lay awake for a long time, her fingers touching her lips, her heart singing with a joy she had not known existed. The next days took on a new quality. Everyone in the cabin could sense the change between Vincent and Natalie, though nothing was said openly. They found excuses to be near each other, to touch hands when passing objects, to exchange looks that spoke volumes. Mrs. Patterson, recovered enough to be observant, watched them with knowing eyes. One afternoon when Natalie was helping her mend some clothing, the older woman spoke up. "He is a good man, that one," she said, nodding toward where Vincent was outside chopping more firewood with Billy. Natalie felt her cheeks warm. "Yes, he is, and he looks at you like you hung the moon." Mrs. Patterson's needle flashed in the firelight. "I have been married 40 years, child. I know what it looks like when two people are falling in love. Is it that obvious?" Natalie asked, embarrassed but also secretly pleased. "Only to anyone with eyes in their head." Mrs. Patterson smiled. "Do not waste time being coy about it, Miss Jameson. Life is too short and too uncertain out here. If you have found something real with that man, you hold on to it with both hands." That night, Vincent asked Natalie to walk with him. They bundled up against the cold and ventured out into the clear, star-filled night. Vincent led her to a spot where the trees opened up to reveal a view of the valley below, the mountains rising on all sides like protective walls. "I have been thinking," Vincent said, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "About what you said. About existing versus living." Natalie waited, letting him find his words. "For 5 years I convinced myself that I was better off alone. That I did not need people, did not want complications." He turned to face her. "Then you stumbled out of that stagecoach, half frozen and twice as stubborn, and everything I thought I knew got turned on its head." "I can be stubborn," Natalie admitted with a small smile. "You are brave and kind, and you see good in me that I stopped seeing in myself a long time ago." Vincent took her hands in his. "Natalie, I do not have much. This cabin, some land, a life that is hard and sometimes dangerous. But if you want it, if you want me, I am yours." Natalie's heart felt too big for her chest. "Vincent Quinn, are you asking me to stay?" "I am asking you to marry me," Vincent said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "I am asking you to take a chance on a broken-down cavalry scout who lives in the middle of nowhere. I am asking you to build a life with me, whatever that life looks like." Natalie did not hesitate. "Yes. Yes, absolutely yes." Vincent's face split into a grin that transformed his features, making him look years younger. He swept her up in his arms, lifting her clean off her feet and spinning her around. Natalie laughed, a sound of pure joy that echoed off the surrounding mountains. When he set her down, they kissed again, this time with no hesitation, no holding back. They kissed like two people who had found something rare and precious, and had no intention of letting it go. Inside the cabin, Mrs. Patterson heard Natalie's laugh and smiled to herself. The driver and Billy exchanged knowing looks. Love in the wilderness, forged in survival and hardship, was about the truest thing there was. The next few weeks brought changes. The weather improved enough that Vincent felt confident making the journey to Fort Davis. The plan was for him to take the driver and Billy first, let them report back to the stage company, and arrange for the stage to be recovered when the snow melted. Then he would bring Mrs. Patterson to town and help Natalie connect with her uncle. But there was also a wedding to plan, simple as it would be. Mrs. Patterson, delighted to have a project, insisted on making Natalie a proper dress from fabric she had been carrying in her trunk. The driver, who turned out to be a lay preacher in his spare time, agreed to perform the ceremony. They decided to marry before leaving for Fort Davis. Vincent wanted Natalie to be his wife in the eyes of God and man before they faced the world together. The ceremony took place on a clear February morning in 1878, with the cabin decorated with pine boughs and the fire burning bright and warm. Natalie wore a simple dress of cream-colored wool that Mrs. Patterson had worked on day and night, altering it to fit Natalie's slim frame. She left her auburn hair loose, the way Vincent liked it, Vincent had bathed and trimmed his beard, put on his cleanest shirt. But it was the look in his eyes when he saw Natalie that took her breath away. He looked at her like she was the answer to every question he had ever asked. The driver spoke the traditional words, and Vincent and Natalie repeated them with voices that shook with emotion. When it came time to exchange rings, Vincent produced 2 simple bands he had carved from bone and polished until they shone. "I will get you a proper gold ring when we get to town," he promised as he slid the band onto her finger. "This is perfect," Natalie said, meaning it with all her heart. "I do not need gold, Vincent, I just need you." "Then you have got me," Vincent said. "For as long as I draw breath, you have got me." The driver pronounced them man and wife, and they sealed their vows with a kiss that made Mrs. Patterson dab at her eyes with a handkerchief and Billy grin like a fool. That night, their wedding night, Vincent and Natalie finally had the cabin to themselves. The others had tactfully decided to sleep in the loft, giving the newlyweds privacy. Vincent built up the fire until the cabin was warm as summer, then turned to find his wife watching him with eyes that held both nervousness and desire. "I have never," Natalie began, then stopped, blushing. Vincent crossed to her in 3 long strides and took her hands. "Neither have I," he admitted. "I mean, I have never been with someone I loved, someone who mattered. So in all the ways that count, we are both new at this." The honesty in his voice eased Natalie's nerves. She reached up to touch his face, tracing the line of his beard. "Then we will figure it out together." What followed was tender and fumbling and absolutely perfect. Vincent was gentle despite his size and strength, taking his time, making sure Natalie felt safe and cherished. And Natalie gave herself to her husband completely, trusting him with her body and her heart. Afterwards, they lay tangled together beneath the firs, the firelight casting dancing shadows on the walls. Vincent held Natalie against his chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her skin. "I love you," he said into the darkness. "I know I do not say it enough, but I want you to hear it now. I love you, Natalie Quinn." Natalie smiled at the sound of her new name. "I love you too, Vincent, more than I knew it was possible to love anyone." They talked late into the night, making plans for their future. Vincent owned the land his cabin sat on, 160 acres claimed under the Homestead Act. They could expand the cabin, maybe even build a small ranch. Fort Davis was close enough that they would not be completely isolated, but far enough to preserve the peace and beauty that drew Vincent to the mountains in the first place. Natalie shared her dreams too. She had taught school back in Philadelphia and thought she might do so again, for the children of settlers scattered through the area. She wanted to learn everything Vincent could teach her about surviving and thriving in this wild land. "We can build something good here," Vincent said, his voice heavy with sleep. "Something true and lasting." "We already have," Natalie murmured, pressing a kiss to his chest. "We already have." A week later, they made the journey to Fort Davis. The trip took 2 days with frequent stops to rest, but the weather held and they arrived without incident. Fort Davis was a small but growing town, centered around the military fort that gave it its name. Adobe buildings lined dusty streets, and Natalie could see the potential for growth as more settlers moved into the area. Her uncle, Thomas Jameson, ran the largest trading post in town. He was a weathered man in his 50s who greeted Natalie with genuine warmth and surprise. "I had given you up for dead," he said, enfolding her in a hug. "When the stage did not arrive and we heard about the storm, I feared the worst." "I would have died if not for Vincent," Natalie said, reaching for her husband's hand. "Uncle Thomas, I would like you to meet my husband, Vincent Quinn." Thomas looked between them with raised eyebrows, then let out a bark of laughter. "Well, I did tell you to find an adventure out here. I guess you took me at my word." He shook Vincent's hand with enthusiasm. "Any man who can save my niece from a blizzard and win her heart is welcome in my family." They spent several days in Fort Davis, getting to know the town and making connections. Vincent sold some of his furs at Thomas's trading post for good prices, and they used the money to buy supplies for the cabin. Natalie reconnected with her uncle and met several families who expressed interest in hiring a teacher for their children come fall. Mrs. Patterson, fully recovered, was reunited with her daughter who lived on a ranch outside town. The reunion was tearful and joyful, and Mrs. Patterson insisted that Vincent and Natalie visit often. "You saved my life," she told Vincent. "I will never forget that. And you," she turned to Natalie, "you keep this man happy, you hear? He deserves all the happiness in the world." The driver and Billy went back to work for the stage company, but not before sharing drinks with Vincent and telling everyone who would listen about the mountain man who had walked 12 miles through deadly snow to rescue them. Word of the rescue spread through Fort Davis and the surrounding area. People began to look at Vincent with respect, and several ranchers offered him work as a guide or scout if he ever wanted it. But Vincent politely declined. He had his land, his wife, and his future to build. They returned to the cabin in early March as the snow began to melt and the first hints of spring appeared. The valley was coming alive with the sound of running water and birdsong, and Natalie felt like she was seeing it with new eyes. This was her home now. Not the civilized streets of Philadelphia with their gas lamps and strict social rules, but this wild, beautiful place where every day required strength and resilience and courage. Vincent threw himself into improving the cabin and the land. He built additions to the structure, creating a separate bedroom and a larger kitchen. He fenced in an area for a garden that Natalie planned to plant as soon as the ground thawed completely. He even constructed a small stable for the 2 horses they had purchased in Fort Davis. Natalie proved to be an apt student of wilderness living. She learned to shoot Vincent's rifle, becoming proficient enough that he trusted her to hunt small game. She learned to identify edible plants and medicinal herbs. She learned to read the signs of changing weather and how to preserve food for the long winters. But more than that, she learned what it meant to be truly happy. Every morning she woke beside the man she loved, in a place they were building together. Every evening they sat by the fire and talked about their day, their dreams, their lives. It was simple and hard and absolutely perfect. Summer arrived in a burst of green and gold. The garden Natalie planted flourished beyond her expectations, providing them with fresh vegetables to supplement their diet of meat and fish. Vincent took her fishing in the streams and hiking through the high country, showing her the secret places he had discovered during his years of solitude. One evening in late June, as they sat on the porch Vincent had built watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of orange and purple, Natalie shared news that made Vincent's eyes go wide with wonder. "I am going to have a baby," she said, watching his face carefully. "Come January, we are going to be parents." For a moment Vincent just stared at her, processing the information. Then he let out a whoop of joy that startled a flock of birds from a nearby tree. He swept Natalie into his arms, spinning her around just like he had the night he proposed. "A baby," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Natalie asked, though the answer was written all over his face. Happy does not even begin to cover it. Vincent set her down carefully, as if she had suddenly become made of glass. "A child." "Our child. Natalie, I never thought I would have a family. I never thought I deserved one." "You deserve every good thing," Natalie said firmly. "And this child is going to be so lucky to have you as a father." The months that followed were busy as they prepared for the baby. Vincent built a cradle from pine and lined it with soft furs. Natalie sewed tiny clothes from fabric she had gotten from her uncle's store. They talked endlessly about names and what kind of parents they wanted to be. In October, Natalie began teaching at a small schoolhouse that had been built halfway between Fort Davis and several outlying ranches. 3 days a week, Vincent rode with her to the school, dropped her off, then picked her up in the afternoon. The children adored her, and Natalie found deep satisfaction in sharing knowledge and watching young minds grow. As winter approached and Natalie's pregnancy advanced, they made plans for the birth. Mrs. Patterson, who had experience as a midwife, agreed to come stay with them when Natalie's time drew near. Vincent, terrified at the thought of anything going wrong, made sure they had every supply they might need. January of 1879 arrived with clear, cold weather. Natalie's labor began on a Sunday morning, starting with mild pains that gradually intensified. Vincent sent word to Mrs. Patterson, who arrived by mid-afternoon with her daughter. The labor was long and difficult, testing Natalie's strength to its limits. Vincent stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her brow, whispering encouragement and love. Finally, as the sun was setting and painting the cabin walls in golden light, their daughter entered the world with a lusty cry that made Vincent's heart swell with more love than he thought possible. "She is perfect," Mrs. Patterson said, placing the tiny, squirming bundle on Natalie's chest. "Absolutely perfect." Natalie looked down at her daughter, at the tiny face and waving fists, and felt tears stream down her cheeks. "Vincent, look at what we made." Vincent leaned over them both, his own eyes wet. He touched one finger to his daughter's tiny hand, and her fingers immediately curled around his, gripping tight. "She has got a strong grip," he said with a shaky laugh. "Takes after her mother." They named her Sarah Rose Quinn, and from the moment she arrived, she became the center of their world. Vincent, who had once thought himself too damaged to deserve happiness, discovered reserves of love and patience he had not known he possessed. He would pace the cabin floor at night with Sarah when she cried, singing her old cavalry songs in his deep rumble of a voice until she settled. Natalie marveled at the transformation in her husband. The lonely, haunted man she had met in the snow had become a devoted father who lit up every time his daughter smiled at him. Spring arrived again, Sarah's first spring, and the family settled into new rhythms. Natalie took a break from teaching to focus on their daughter, though she planned to return in the fall. Vincent continued to improve their land, adding more fences, more structures, building the foundation of a real homestead. Thomas Jameson visited frequently, delighted to have family nearby. He doted on his great-niece and often brought gifts from the trading post. Mrs. Patterson and her daughter became regular visitors as well, and slowly, Vincent and Natalie built a community around them. One evening in May, as they sat on the porch watching Sarah play on a blanket spread on the grass, Natalie leaned her head on Vincent's shoulder. "Do you ever think about how we met?" she asked. "Every day," Vincent said. "I think about how close I came to not going out there. How I almost convinced myself it was not my problem. But you did go. You walked 12 miles through snow that could have killed you. Best decision I ever made." Vincent kissed the top of her head. "That storm brought me everything I did not know I needed. It brought me you." Natalie lifted her face for a proper kiss, which Vincent gladly provided. Sarah, noticing her parents were distracted, let out an indignant squawk that made them both laugh. "Someone wants attention," Natalie said, moving to pick up their daughter. Vincent watched his wife and child, the setting sun turning their hair to fire and gold, and felt a peace settle over him that he had not known since before the war. The ghosts that had haunted him for so long were still there, would probably always be there, but they no longer had power over him. He had found something stronger than guilt and shame. He had found love, family, purpose. The years that followed brought their share of challenges. There were hard winters and dry summers, illness and injury, the constant struggle of frontier life. But there were also moments of profound joy. Sarah's first steps, taken on the porch while Vincent and Natalie both watched with hearts in their throats. Her first words, which were "Papa," much to Vincent's delight. The expansion of their home as their family grew. In the fall of 1881, Natalie gave birth to their son, whom they named Thomas Vincent Quinn after both his grandfather and his father. Thomas was a robust baby with his father's dark eyes and his mother's smile. Sarah, now nearly 3, took her role as big sister seriously, always wanting to help care for her baby brother. Vincent expanded the cabin yet again, adding a second bedroom for the children and enlarging the main living space. The homestead was becoming a proper ranch, with a small herd of cattle, chickens for eggs, and horses for transportation and work. Natalie returned to teaching, now working from a small schoolhouse Vincent built on their own land. Children from neighboring homesteads came for lessons 3 days a week, and Natalie found she could balance her roles as teacher, mother, and wife with satisfaction. The town of Fort Davis continued to grow, and Vincent and Natalie found themselves becoming pillars of the community. Vincent's skills as a guide and scout were often called upon, though he never strayed far from home for long. Natalie organized social gatherings and helped establish a small church. But their favorite times were still the quiet evenings at home, when the children were asleep, and they could sit together and talk about their day, their dreams, their life. They never lost the sense of wonder at what they had built together, starting from that desperate rescue in a snowstorm. One winter evening in 1884, as they celebrated their 6th wedding anniversary, Vincent presented Natalie with a gift. It was a gold ring, simple and elegant, sized to fit over the bone ring he had given her at their wedding. "I promised you a gold ring," he said, slipping it onto her finger. "Took me a while to make good on that promise." Natalie looked at the 2 rings together, bone and gold, and shook her head. "I would have been happy with just the bone ring forever, but this is beautiful, Vincent. Thank you. You gave me everything," Vincent said, pulling her into his arms. "A home, a family, a reason to wake up every morning and be grateful. A ring seems like the least I can do." They danced slowly in the firelight, moving to music only they could hear, while outside the snow fell softly and the mountains stood eternal watch over their valley. Sarah, now 5 years old, sometimes asked her parents about how they met. Vincent would tell her about the storm and the stagecoach trapped in the pass, about walking 12 miles through snow so deep it could swallow a man whole. "Why did you go, Papa?" Sarah would ask, snuggled against his chest. "You did not even know Mama then." "Because someone needed help," Vincent would say. "And because somewhere deep down I think I knew that my life was about to change forever. I just did not realize how much, or how wonderful that change would be." Natalie would catch his eye over Sarah's head and smile, remembering the first time she had seen him, this massive, bearded mountain man emerging from the snow like something out of a legend. She remembered being half frozen and terrified, and then feeling an instant sense of safety when Vincent had caught her arm and steadied her. She remembered the journey to his cabin, the growing awareness of attraction, the moment by the woodpile when he had shared his painful past, and she had seen the good man beneath the guilt and isolation. Most of all, she remembered the decision to stay, to build a life in this wild place with this extraordinary man. It had been the easiest and most important decision of her life. By the time Thomas turned 5 in 1886, The Quinn homestead was prospering. Vincent had proven to be a skilled rancher, and their small herd had grown into something substantial. Natalie's school had expanded, with students coming from as far as 20 miles away. They had built a small bunkhouse for older students who stayed during the week, turning the homestead into not just a ranch but a center of learning for the region. Sarah showed signs of inheriting both her parents' strengths. She was brave and curious like her mother, with her father's intuitive understanding of the land and animals. Thomas was quieter but equally intelligent, with a gift for numbers and a gentle way with the horses. Vincent and Natalie often talked about having more children, and in 1887, Natalie became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and in early 1888 they welcomed twin daughters into the world. They named them Emily Rose and Grace Ann, and Sarah and Thomas were absolutely entranced with their baby sisters. The cabin, now a sprawling house with multiple additions, rang with the sounds of childhood. Laughter and sometimes tears, questions and stories, the patter of small feet and the deeper rumble of Vincent's voice as he told tales or taught lessons. Thomas Jameson, growing elderly but still sharp, visited as often as his health allowed. He loved gathering his expanding family around him, marveling at how the niece he had invited west had created such a beautiful life. "You did good, Natalie," he told her on one visit, watching Vincent play with the children in the yard. "That man, that family, this home. You did real good." "I got lucky," Natalie said. "The stage got trapped, Vincent came to rescue us, and everything fell into place." "Luck had nothing to do with it," Thomas said firmly. "You made choices, both of you, brave choices. That is what built this, not luck." Natalie supposed he was right. She had chosen to come west, chosen to see the good in Vincent, chosen to stay and build a life with him. Vincent had chosen to walk 12 miles through deadly snow, chosen to open his heart despite his fears, chosen to be the man his family needed. In 1890, as the decade turned and Sarah approached her 11th birthday, Vincent took his family on a trip to the mountains. They packed supplies and traveled to the spot where the stagecoach had been trapped 12 years earlier. The pass looked different in summer, green and alive, the deep snow of that long-ago winter just a memory. But Vincent could still picture exactly where the coach had been, where he had first seen Natalie stumbling toward him through the white. "This is where you saved Mama?" Sarah asked, looking around with wide eyes. "This is where I found the greatest treasure of my life," Vincent said, pulling Natalie close. "This is where everything began." They made camp for the night in the pass, and as the children slept under the stars, Vincent and Natalie sat by the fire and remembered. "You ever regret it?" Vincent asked quietly. "Giving up your life in Philadelphia, the comfort and society, for this hard land and a man who lives in the middle of nowhere?" Natalie looked at him like he had grown a second head. "Vincent Quinn, I have never regretted a single moment. I found more in these mountains with you than I ever would have found in a dozen Philadelphia drawing rooms. I found myself. I found love. I found home." "I am glad," Vincent said, his voice rough with emotion, "because I could not imagine my life without you. Could not imagine who I would be if that storm had not brought you to me." "A lonely man in a cabin," Natalie said. "Surviving but not living, just like I said all those years ago. And now you are a father, a husband, a rancher, a teacher to your children, a friend to your neighbors. You are everything you were always meant to be, Vincent. You just needed someone to show you the way back to yourself." They made love that night under the stars, quiet and tender, reaffirming the bond that had been forged in desperation and grown into something unbreakable. The years continued to pass, bringing with them the joys and sorrows that mark any life. Thomas Jameson passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1892, leaving the trading post to Natalie. They decided to keep it running, hiring a manager while maintaining ownership, creating another stream of income for their growing family. Sarah blossomed into a beautiful young woman with her mother's intelligence and her father's love of the wilderness. She had no shortage of suitors as she entered her late teens, but she was choosy, having grown up watching her parents' deep love and refusing to settle for less. Thomas Jr. showed an aptitude for business and took an interest in running the trading post. By his 16th birthday in 1897, he was essentially managing the operation with guidance from his parents. The twins, Emily and Grace, were inseparable and shared a love of teaching. They often helped their mother with the school, showing patience and creativity with the younger students. In 1898, Vincent and Natalie celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary. Their children organized a party at the homestead, inviting friends and neighbors from across the region. Mrs. Patterson, now in her 80s but still sharp, attended and made a speech about how she had known from the first that Vincent and Natalie were meant for each other. "I spent 3 days trapped in that stagecoach thinking I was going to die," she said to the gathered crowd. "And then this mountain of a man came walking out of the snow like an answer to prayer. He saved our lives, and in the process, he found his own salvation. That is what love does. It saves us, not from danger necessarily, but from ourselves. From loneliness and despair, and the belief that we do not deserve happiness." Vincent stood and raised his glass. "To Natalie," he said, his voice carrying across the yard, "who saw something in a broken-down scout that I did not see in myself. Who took a chance on a life that was not easy or comfortable. Who gave me everything I have that matters. I love you more today than I did 20 years ago, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." Natalie, tears streaming down her face, stood and went to her husband. They kissed while their children and friends cheered, and it felt exactly like that first kiss in the moonlight outside Vincent's cabin, full of promise and hope and perfect trust. As the new century approached, bringing with it changes that would transform the West from frontier to settled land, Vincent and Natalie watched from their porch and felt content. They had seen the wild days and helped tame them, not with violence but with hard work and love and the determination to build something lasting. Sarah married in 1900, choosing a young rancher from near Fort Stockton, who reminded Natalie of a young Vincent with his quiet strength and gentle ways. Thomas took over full management of the trading post, expanding it into one of the most successful businesses in the region. Emily and Grace both became teachers, establishing a school that would serve the area for decades. Vincent and Natalie became grandparents in 1901, when Sarah gave birth to a son. Holding his grandson for the first time, Vincent felt the same overwhelming love he had experienced when his own children were born, and he marveled again at how his life had unfolded. "Did you ever imagine this?" Natalie asked him one evening as they watched their grandson play in the yard, now well into middle age but still deeply in love. "All those years ago when you were alone in these mountains, did you ever imagine you would have all this?" "Never," Vincent admitted. "I thought I would live and die alone, that it was what I deserved. I could not have imagined you or the children or any of this. It is so much more than I ever dreamed possible." "I am glad I took that stage," Natalie said. "Glad it got trapped in the pass. Glad you were stubborn enough to walk 12 miles through snow to rescue strangers. Best 12 miles I ever walked." Vincent pulled her close, as he had done thousands of times over their years together. "Best decision I ever made." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red and purple. The valley spread before them, their home and their legacy, built on the foundation of a love that began in a snowstorm and grew into something that would outlast them both. In the years that followed, Vincent and Natalie settled into the rhythm of grandparenting and overseeing their various enterprises while letting their children take on more responsibility. They traveled some, visiting Sarah and her growing family, checking on the trading post, but they always returned to their valley, to the cabin that had grown into a sprawling ranch house but still retained its heart in that original single room where they had first truly talked, first fallen in love. Vincent's hair went fully gray, and his beard was more silver than brown, but he remained strong and vital, still chopping his own firewood and riding out to check on the cattle. Natalie aged gracefully, her auburn hair fading to copper and then to white, but her eyes remained as bright and intelligent as the day Vincent had first met her. They were fixtures in the community, respected and loved. Vincent was sought out for his knowledge of the land and his wisdom. Natalie was beloved as a teacher and mentor to multiple generations. Together, they represented what the West could be at its best, a place where hard work and love could build something lasting, where people from different backgrounds could come together and create new lives. In 1910, on a warm June evening, Vincent and Natalie sat on their porch as they had done countless times before. They were in their 60s now, slowing down but still active, still engaged with the world and each other. "You remember what you said to me that night by the woodpile?" Natalie asked, her hand clasped in Vincent's. "About how being alone was not the same as being at peace." "I do," Vincent said. "I was wrong about a lot of things back then. You were right about that, though. Being alone is not the same as being at peace. But being together, building a life with someone you love, that is peace. That is everything." Vincent looked at his wife, at the woman who had changed his entire world by stumbling out of a snow-trapped stagecoach 32 years ago. Her face was lined now, her hair white, her hands marked by years of work, and she was still the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "I love you, Natalie Quinn," he said, as he had said so many times over their decades together. "You gave me a life worth living. And you gave me adventure and love and a home in the most beautiful place on earth," Natalie replied. "We gave each other everything that matters." They sat together as the stars emerged, one by one, in the vast Texas sky. Around them, the ranch they had built together hummed with quiet activity. In town, the businesses they had started continued to thrive. Across the region, children and grandchildren carried on their legacy. But here, on this porch in this moment, it was just the two of them. The mountain man and the woman from Philadelphia. The rescuer and the rescued. Though over the years those roles had blurred and reversed so many times that it was impossible to say who had saved whom. All that mattered was that a storm had trapped a stagecoach in a mountain pass, and a lonely man had walked 12 miles through killing snow to reach them. Everything else, all the love and family and life that followed, had flowed from that one decision, that one act of courage and compassion. As they sat together in the twilight, hands clasped and hearts full, Vincent and Natalie Quinn knew they had found what everyone searches for. A love that endures, a partnership that strengthens with time, and the knowledge that they had built something good and true that would outlast them both. The mountains stood eternal watch over their valley as they had from the beginning, as they would long after. But for now, this moment was enough. This love was enough. They were enough together, as they had been from that first desperate meeting in the snow. And as the stars wheeled overhead and the night grew soft and dark, Vincent and Natalie remained on their porch, two souls who had found each other against all odds and held on tight, building a life and a love that became legend in the wild, beautiful land they called home.